our next guest, Andrew Fox, the co-founder and CEO of CRGE Enterprises. He's here and he wants your questions. Andrew, good morning. How are we doing?
Hey, man. How are you? Nice to see you.
Good to see you as well. So I believe you do have a short presentation, right? And I think we're going to bring it up on the screen.
Yep.
And so we can rip through that. But you said it yourself, man. You want the questions. I got a question.
Oh, yeah. Perfect. And I would prefer as many questions as possible.
Okay.
I love the engagement. So I'll try to briefly take you guys through our presentation and then leave it open for as many questions as possible.
All right.
So thank you for pulling it up on the screen. Just before we start, we mean what we say, that we really do share our success with all of our stakeholders. And as I get through my presentation, you'll hear a little bit about our workforce and some of the innovative things that we're doing in this kind of what we see as a bit of an industrial revolution in the EV space. So next slide is just a legal slide, and then we can go into the next slide, please. So we started the company in January of 2019 solely with a mission to focus on infrastructure for electric vehicles. As we evolved, the business made some acquisitions along the way. We brought on senior executives from Ford, American Express, and some other very well-known companies. And I think as we get into the business here in a second, people will have a lot of questions on how we've been able to do what we've been able to do so quickly. But I think it's because we are maniacally focused on an area in the EV space and telecommunication, for that matter, that you can't outsource to a third party. So please, next slide. So our executive team, like I said, we're getting bigger. We're now 157 people in the company. 2 weeks ago, we just added our first ever CFO, who came from Deloitte & Touche and American Express. But we have a number of Ford executives and overall a great team. Next slide, please. So let me tell you a little bit about our business. We think of our business as kind of building the communication and electrification infrastructures that power the future. And in the infrastructure side, think about like charging electric vehicles and 5G and telecom and all the infrastructure design and installation and maintenance that goes around that. And then kind of the IoT of things that connect to those things. And on the communication side, every time you pick up your cell phone or landline call, there are little processes that go on, and we're making sure we're taking a little toll on each of those. Next slide, please. So I like to say this because I've been studying the EV space for quite some time, and I like to be humble but old-fashioned. And old-fashioned to me means I love revenue. And so, we started the company in 2019. Obviously, we had a de minimis amount of revenue. In 2020, we did 80 million. We're on track right now to do 450 plus million this year. And as I take you through our life cycle and our business model, I think people will appreciate that I'm a little old fashioned. And so when I look at the EV space and I see companies based on projections that are 5 years out with no revenue, I caution early investors that these are all projections. And so I'm trying to base on historicals. And so you'll see my revenue ramp very nicely. And what you'll also see is that we have a commitment to the workforce that's helping us produce this revenue. Next slide, please. So our mission is to make it simple to go electric. Around that, we build the infrastructure for both 5G and electric vehicles. We like to say we do the work that others don't. And if you think about this EV revolution, it might be upon us, but the infrastructure is not. And so there's all this very meaty stuff that needs to get fixed. Next slide, please. So the market that we're after is a pretty substantial market, and it continues to grow. Next slide, please. So what do we do? Our vision is to establish ourselves as a global leader in the technology, installation, operation of EV charging systems, portable power, and 5G infrastructure. To become the most trusted infrastructure company in the world, we have to do certain things right. We have to offer white glove service and superior training to our team members. But we also have to innovate and design and make sure that we can select locations that have better utilization and engineer and install through this entire new life cycle of electric vehicle infrastructure that's needed. Next slide, please. And so from energy transmission to generation to industrial there's a whole bunch of work that we're now doing to prepare for this EV revolution. And it's not just installing EV charging systems. And so one of the reasons why we're so bullish on this is as this EV revolution comes upon us, you got to upgrade the grid as well. And so there's a big, huge pot of money here and abroad to go get to, as the EV revolution happens, the grid and all these other ancillary pieces get upgraded. Next slide, please. And so why we're so excited about the space, simply put, is today there's, about 2% of the vehicles on the road, about 1.7 million vehicles are electric. It's expected to, more than 9x over the next 10 years, which means that the amount of infrastructure that's needed. So just in US charging outlets for electric vehicles today, there are only about 100,000 charging stations. We need somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 million. And so the CapEx around that is huge. But at the same time, Verizon and AT&T, who are also big customer of ours, are spending almost $50 billion rolling out their 5G. And so by doing this work that others don't want to do in the infrastructure space, we're really positioned uniquely. And it's why we're so excited about it. Next slide, please. So next slide, thank you. So in the infrastructure division, we make it, and this is how we talk to our customers, we make it simple to go electric. What does that mean? All right, we're accelerating, obviously, the uses away from fossil fuels, but we're focused today on the US auto dealers. There's 17,000 of them, they're low-hanging fruit, and the vast majority of them need to be upgraded, mandated by the OEMs. And so I hope someone asks me a couple of questions about what we're doing in automotive. I want to try to get through my presentation, but please, if anybody has any questions on the automotive side, I'll be happy to go through it. Next slide, please. So we do the behind the scenes work. We hook up from the grid to the digging of the hole to the IoT device that goes on the system. In that entire life cycle, we're kind of agnostic to the hardware, but we're doing all the infrastructure heavy lifting. And we make all these systems work behind the scenes. And we're not looking for the credit. And so whether it's a Blink system, a ChargePoint system, or any other host of systems that we're installing on the EV side, or AT&T or Verizon or any of our big telco customers, it's usually their brand you'll see front and center, and we like being behind the scenes. Next slide, please. And so when you think about, where we are in the 5G world today, we provide a tremendous amount of services around 5G. But if you think about where that relates to in the EV world, we're at 1G. And so we don't like to talk too much about the past, but we want the past to be a historical value creator in terms of you're at first generation charging systems today and you're at 5G in telecommunications. And so as the telecommunication goes to 6G, you'll see EV go to 2G in that analogy. Next slide, please. And we also just introduced something called power banks, which are a critical amenity. And once again, what we are going to do as an infrastructure company is innovate on certain things and find areas to build consumer inroads. And so power banks is something we just launched in Atlanta. If people are following our press releases, we've signed up close to 100 places already in the first month. And it's just an interesting data capturing tool for us more than anything. Next slide, please. Our business started in 2019 with solving the problem for micromobility. Some of you may know I was an early investor in Lime, and this was the impetus for the entire charge business. We introduced our first generation charging systems in the city of Paris and solved a unique problem where scooters were piled up on the street one day, and then we put infrastructure in the next. Next slide, please. Our communications, once again, I hope people ask questions about this, but we connect calls globally. It's part of our early mission was to get big quick and make sure we had a global presence. Today we have operations in 19 countries with our telephone connection business. And while it might be a low margin business, it gives us inroads into some of the biggest companies in the world. Next slide, please. Perfect. So once again, just our business model in terms of connecting people one conversation at a time via electric, via EV, via telecommunications. This was the first company that we bought. It was 24 years in business, and it transacts billions of international minutes annually. Next slide, please. Thank you. And then just last but not least, investment highlights of our business, and then I hope we can get into some questions. But we're a global business with interlocking capabilities, a seasoned management team, sales relationships in over 19 countries, and we're on a run rate to do north of 450 million of revenue this year. And now we turn it over to any questions that anybody had. You can just hit the last slide.
Your comment about liking revenue seemed like you were thinking about some people when you said that. Maybe not. Okay, Andrew, some questions that I've got, and we've got a few in the chat as well. First one that jumped out to me was, so we're talking about the electric vehicle, the electrical infrastructure. That's basically what this is, as opposed to other alternative energy types, right? We're talking about the electric grid. That's your sandbox.
Well, I mean, the sandbox that we're in is providing infrastructure for electric vehicles. But when you zoom out, it's not just putting in a charging station. From the transmission lines to the grid, there's a lot of upgrades that are going to take place. And even when you read about like all this infrastructure spending, it's not just in like installing stations. There's just a lot of ancillary work that needs to upgrade in order for us to even generate the type of power that we're talking about.
So are you competing with companies like Blink and Volta, and if so, what are your advantages there? And this is from
quite the opposite. We work with those guys.
Okay.
We have MSAs in place. We solve kind of the long pole in the tent problem for those guys manufacturing those systems, which is installing their systems. And when you think about the elasticity around the installation, if I'm just going to use a simple round number. If a unit costs $50,000 on a commercial level to install, about $35,000 of that would be for the installation part of it, and about 15 would be for the hardware. And so we're agnostic for the hardware. We work with all the hardware providers that install across that entire ecosystem.
So Europe is a few years ahead of the US in terms of their EV. In terms of just EVs in general. So can you speak a little bit about what you've got going on outside North America, maybe in Europe specifically?
We've had a beachhead in the EU and in the UK.
Okay.
I'm very aggressive. And I think that we're learning a lot from them. We are not 2 or 3 years behind. We're much further behind than that.
Much further. Okay.
And so we're very, we're very keen on what they're doing there, learning what they're doing there, and being able to adopt some of their best practices. The good news is that it's like the equivalent of being at the top half of the first inning of a ball game or baseball game. It's very, very early in this life cycle. And so the good news is they're ahead of us and by a significant margin today, but we can close that gap. And as a company, we will close that gap because we have ambitions to be a global business.
You spoke about being hardware agnostic. This is another one from the chat here. Will there be a common charger that works for all the EVs, all the different brands out there? A universal charger, is that the goal?
I mean, that's the common sense. It's like the USB charger and now the USB-C charger. It's mind-boggling that there are 3 different formats domestically speaking here. And I hate to say it, but it's companies like ours that have to now innovate and like bang the drum. And you said something before, and I wasn't referring to any of the people, but it's very hard to innovate when you don't have any revenue. And a lot of these companies that have gotten these sky-high valuations but don't have any revenue yet, it's really hard for them to innovate when their first-generation product isn't even out the door. And so I think a lot of what you're seeing is just the early mistakes that the original auto industry made, where there were 600 manufacturers of automotive vehicles in the early days of the automotive boom. And so there are all sorts of competing things. Hopefully they'll flush out. I'm screaming as loud as I can. There should be one universal format. But then again, it's just so early that a lot of people aren't even hearing us yet.
Okay, we got 5 minutes left and a lot more questions, guys. I'm going as fast as I can. Andrew, what is the lowest hanging fruit for you guys right now?
Lowest hanging fruit for us is 17,000 U.S. auto dealers. It's what we predominantly focus on right now. We hired the former ex-president of Ford Canada and the former head of General Motors North America to tackle this. Inside the 17,000 U.S. auto dealers, that's like the Cadillacs and those guys, not your local used car lot, but the vast majority of those guys must upgrade. They must upgrade to be able to start selling electric vehicles. So that's the channel that's the lowest hanging fruit for us today.
We're talking about getting contracts with the manufacturers and companies like Blink, et cetera. But are you also working with governments?
Well, in the zero emission states, in the ZEV states, where the incentives are greater, it's not necessarily working with the government. Although we do have a beachhead in Washington, D.C., and it's important for us to have our tentacles into this infrastructure bill. And I think, these spending bills wind up getting pushed to the states. And so we have an active, government relation program. But I'm not betting my business on government stuff. It will add some nice wind to our sail, but it's not my strategy. My strategy right now is laser focused in on things that we're laser focused in on.
So going back to the universal charger, I guess for a second, you believe that makes too much sense not to happen. Is that like, would a hypothetical future universal charging station, would that lead to increased EV adoption, or other way around? Would increased EV adoption lead to that? Or does it matter? Maybe it doesn't matter.
I mean, right now you have something called range anxiety, and that range anxiety is there just aren't enough ample fast charging stations around. And so whether you had a universal, and I think Tesla, ChargePoint, Blink, a lot of these guys are going to start opening up more and more and more. They have to. It's just part of this mandate. I think it's actually part of this infrastructure bill to figure it out. But when you're, the first generation technology into something, everybody's trying to figure out who's going to be, VHS and Betamax. And so I think a lot of people to figure it out. And it's why we play in the neutral category. We want to help all of them succeed. And so in these early stages, we're training and I have to invest in training on multiple systems, but I'm okay with that because part of what my role in this is to push the EV movement forward. And so on the infrastructure side, I have to be able to work with everybody.
Here's a question from our chat that I should have seen coming. Any plans for Charge Enterprises to uplist?
Yeah, we're in the final throes of that now. I encourage people to look through our press releases. I'm optimistic about that, and this is all part of our multi-tier plan. I know there are not a lot of OTC companies doing our kind of revenue and our kind of growth, and so we do have a plan, and the wheels are in motion.
Wheels are in motion. I know. I always ask for timelines, and I always get the same answer. I can't, and I won't, because it's not entirely up to you, unfortunately. But
yeah, I mean, here's the thing: is I won't BS you. It's a government agency that I'm doing everything I can to run my business, and it's going to happen because we qualify, and it'll happen when it happens. But I'm not going to get hung up on making any promises. It's not my style. And I just want to end with this one thing, which is we're pulling all of our workers up in this. This is a blue collar group of people that we are building, and they're all getting stock options. And so when I talk about sharing our success with stakeholders, it's because I'm the son of a blue collar union electrician. And I know how those guys miss most of these industrial revolutions of sorts where there's, a carry in stock and whatnot. And so it's part of our MO to bring all these people along in this.
Andrew Fox is the co-founder and CEO of Charge Enterprises. Ticker, for now at least, is CRGE, though maybe that changes in the future with an uplist. We'll find out. Fantastic stuff, Andrew. Thank you for being so game for questions from me, from our chat. And I didn't realize that there was a company like yours out there underneath of the infrastructure. So,
I like to think that we play a very important part of seeing this, but we're just behind the scenes.
Yeah. All right. Thanks a lot, Andrew. Appreciate it.
Thanks, buddy. Have a good day.